Hi there, I'm Sherry Weiss, and I want to welcome you to a lesson for online English writing. We're going to start today by talking about two key processes. If this were a face-to-face classroom meeting, then I would just stop and I would ask all of you students to give me your idea of what a process is. But since there isn't anyone here, I'm going to have to give you the answer myself. So a process would be the step-by-step that you use in order to accomplish a task. People like processes because it tells them what to do. So today we're going to talk about two, and the first one is active reading, and the second one is the writing process. You'll see both of these processes have 5 steps. Okay, so we're going to start with talking about active reading. Now, we all learn to read in elementary school, but how many of you, when you're reading, you might go for about 10 minutes, you're 5 pages in, and then you wonder, what was it that I read? Well, I've had that experience too, until I learned something about active reading. Now, when active reading, as the name implies, you're actively participating in it, so you're much more likely to remember things. The first step in active reading, we call that pre-reading. So if I were to suggest to you, you should pre-read an article, some people might say, well, does that mean that I should skim it? And my answer to you would be, no, you shouldn't skim it, because one problem with just skimming through an article is you might read a sentence here or a sentence there and it might be out of context, and so you wouldn't understand it. So let's just take a story that maybe you'll read this semester, maybe you won't. This story is called Pen, Paper, Power. Let's see if you can see the story. Pen, Paper, Power. So if I were to give you the story to read and I would ask you what would you do to pre-read, you might start with the very top where you see the boldface print. You see the title is Pen, Paper, Power. So you might ask yourself, well, what does that mean, pen, paper, power? Okay, it doesn't matter what your answer is. The thing is that you've been active, you've been thinking about, and when you think about a title of a story, what you're doing is you're building a file folder in your head so that everything that you would read from this article would have a place in your brain to go. And the ideas wouldn't be bouncing from this brain cell to that. They'd have this folder that you're building, starting with pen, paper, power. Okay, you can also see focus on your health. So you get the idea that you can become healthier using a pen and paper. You also might read the subhead here, confessional writing can be good for you. Okay, so you get an idea of what this is. So everything that you read, and even taking a look at the picture and thinking about the picture, this builds a very solid file in your head. Okay, so for the first step is pre-reading, and that involves taking a few minutes to do that step. Number 2, I'm reminded of parents who tell their children that they shouldn't write in books, and that's probably not a good idea, because one of the greatest ways you can learn from a book is to write in it. And so the second step is to annotate. Now, annotate means to take notes. So we have this article here, no notes, and if we had read the article, I don't know if you can see this, but there are notes all over the article. Now, when I take notes on an article, sometimes I underline, but very often, even if I underline, I'll write in the margins. And when I write in the margins, that makes it easier for me to integrate the information into my own brain, makes me a little bit wiser. So annotating is very, very helpful. When you're making your annotations, when you're underlining, when you're making your notes, you should also think about interacting with the author, so to speak. And so you ask the author questions, and you put those in the margin too. you might say, well, how could he get that figure? Does that make sense to me? Or I wonder if he ever had that experience. And so by doing that, you are again being active and you're thinking and you're incorporating the wisdom from the article into your brain, and you don't go 5 pages and not know what you didn't read. Okay, after you've finished reading the article, pre-reading, annotating, asking questions, then it's time for a review. So let me show you 2 pieces of paper. Okay, we have the original story that I showed you when we started to pre-read, and we have the story with notes all over it. Okay, which do you think would be easier to review? The one with no notes, where you'd have to read the whole thing over in order to review, or the one with good notes, where all you had to do was read the notes. So I think that that's pretty obvious. It's really good to take notes. Now, your active reading process will not be complete without the 5th step. And the 5th step is your opinion. So in order to complete the process, you have to actually think about what it was that you read and then draw your own opinion. And those 5 steps will make you an active reader and make you wiser and smarter. Okay, we just talked about the reading process, and that had 5 steps. Now we're going to be talking about the writing process, which also has 5 steps. Okay, the problem is that students very often don't view writing as a process. They view it as a task. Sit down with a pen, get it done, hand it in, and then wonder why you don't get an A. Well, the reason you don't get an A, and or the reason you don't come up with something you're proud of, is because you didn't follow the steps in the process. So the first step is called brainstorming. So what that means is, if you're given a topic, and the topic could be anything in the world, you should think about it before you actually start writing. Sometimes you're going to have an opportunity in classes to be in a group and just discuss various ideas for your story. Okay, once you've done the brainstorming, then you start and do the second step, which is drafting. Now, drafting, unfortunately, is where too many students stop. They write their rough draft, they turn it in, they're not very proud of it, and they don't get a good grade. So it's really important, after you've written your rough draft, is to let it sit, put it aside, forget about it, go for a walk, do something else, do some other homework, wash your dishes, something else, and then you come back to it with fresher eyes. Once you've come back to it, you take a very, very important, perhaps the most important step, and that's to revise. Now, the word revise has 2 parts to it. One is the prefix re, which means again, and then the root word is vise, which means see, vision. Okay, so what you should do is you should take your draft and you should re-see it, which means you should go through the entire paper and take a look and see where it's strong, where it's weak, where you need to explain some more. I often suggest to my students they look for the very best line that they've written in that draft, and they might think about starting their paper with that line. Now, why would you start with your best line? Well, if you bury your best line somewhere in the middle or at the end, people might not be interested in it enough to read through to it. So it's a real good idea to think if that will work. Find your best line. If you find your second best line, you might want to end with it, because then you end on a really great note. But this revision part is really, really important. And some people confuse the word revise with editing and proofreading, which I'm going to write down soon because those are other steps. This is a completely separate step. This is a really important step. I'm going to star it. Because when you're writing essays, if you don't revise and you simply go with whatever came off your head with your pen, you're not going to accomplish as wonderful things as you could if you just resaw it and you restructured it and you reorganized it. So after you've done your brainstorming, your drafting, and your revision, then you take the fourth step, which is to edit. Now this is where your spell checker, your grammar checker on your computer might help, but not enough. And that's why the lesson right after this is going to be an error checklist. But the fourth step is where you do the editing. You look at the spelling, you look at the grammar, you look at the sentence structure, you look at the punctuation. Okay? And we will talk a little bit more about that momentarily. But in the writing process, the last step is proofreading. Now, one thing I'll tell you about the word proofreading, is that many people spell it incorrectly as two words, but proofread is one word. So what exactly is proofreading? It's not editing, it's not revising. Proofreading is a step that you take once your paper is already completed and ready to be turned into the teacher. But before you turn it in, you take one more look at it and you make sure that you haven't made any obvious mistakes. You haven't forgotten to capitalize I, like I've seen some people because of texting. They don't do that. You'll learn some other punctuation errors that you might make. And if you turn in your paper and you turn in with those errors and the teacher circles it and takes points off, you'll say, oh, well, I knew that. Well, the thing is, if you knew it, then you need to correct that before that you turn it in. Very often I advise students to start proofreading from the very end, the very last sentence. And you might understand why it's real easy to make mistakes in the last sentence, because you're so happy that it's over that you don't really pay attention. So those are the 5 steps, and if you go through diligently every one of those 5 steps, you're more likely to do a better paper than if you just turn in a draft. Okay, before this segment begins, I had suggested that you download the error checklist that is on your assignment sheet. And what you'll see is a list of more than a dozen errors that students from all over the country and even people who have been through school continue to make. None of them are rocket science, but it's been my experience that people just haven't been taught that these are errors. Interestingly enough, and you'll have a copy of this too, it was a couple years ago that I found an article online that was don't make these simple errors because they'll make you look stupid. So I'm actually going to give you a link to that story. And interestingly enough, most of the errors on that checklist are identical to the ones that I developed in my 40 years of teaching. So we're going to take out the error checklist, take a look. You'll see that there's one column of errors and there's another column that says dates of transgressions. Okay, so transgressions are sins. So no one's going to ask you for this sheet back, but when you get your papers back, if you've made any of these errors, you might just try putting the date that you made that error. And if you see that you've made a certain error on 3 or 4 dates, then that's an error you should figure out some way that you're not going to be making that error anymore. Okay, so we'll start with the first error. And the first error is an error that students make a lot. And what that error is they spell the word a lot as one word. Okay, there is no such word as A-L-O-T. There is a word a, and there is a word lot, but there's no one word, A-L-O-T. Okay, so students use a lot. My suggestion is, by the time you get to English 1A, you should think of a better phrase than a lot, like a variety of, or many, or several. But if you dare to use the phrase a lot, make sure you don't spell it as one word. Not rocket science, right? Okay, the next group of misspellings that people do are related. Okay, the first one happens to be a word that I consider my bugaboo, and that's the word its. So if you were in my classroom, I might ask you, how do you spell the word its? So you might give me one spelling, you might give me another spelling, but what I'd like you to do is to ask me, how are you using the word? Okay, so if I'm using the word to mean it is, okay, that is, and then I want to make it into a contraction. Okay, that its would be spelled I-T apostrophe S. The apostrophe stands for the missing I. Okay, if I wanted to use its as a possessive though, so let me write possessive. Then it would be spelled I-T-S with no apostrophe. Okay, I-T apostrophe S is the contraction, meaning it is. I-T-S is the possessive, no apostrophe. Okay, so if we were in a classroom, what I would do is I would ask everybody, all the students, to come up with a sentence that is I-T apostrophe S. It's a beautiful day, it's my party and I'll cry if I want to, it's my favorite color. All of those I-T apostrophe S mean it is. If, however, I were to ask people to come up with sentences with the possessive its, I'd probably get a long silence because people don't use its very much. Usually it has something to do with a dog. The dog wagged its tail. The book lost its cover in the rain, something. But you don't use ITS very often. It's usually the contraction IT apostrophe S. So if you're lazy and you don't want to think, then 90% of the time IT apostrophe S will be the correct answer. I'm only telling you that one reason, which you'll see very shortly. I don't want you to be lazy. I want you to ask yourself every time you see it's, whether it means it is or whether it's possessive. But I would err on the side with the apostrophe if I didn't have time to check. Now the reason I'm telling you is because the next word that I want you to spell is the word your. So if you were spelling the contraction for you are, that would be Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, and the apostrophe again stands for the missing A, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. The possessive is Y-O-U-R. Okay, now the whole reason that I gave you the first example is because if I were to ask the class members to give me sentences with your, meaning you are, or your possessive, give me your book, or you're going to school starting Monday. The second one, you're going to school starting Monday, would be the contraction. Give me your book would be the possessive. If I were to ask students to come up with sentences, it would be equal. It would be just as easy to come up with a sentence for you are as it would be the possessive your. So you can't guess on this one. And the problem is too many students just spell your, Y-O-U-R, no matter what it means. So in this one, make sure that it's not a contraction. If it's a contraction, it should be Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. The third word along these lines is there. Okay, I'm going to drop down to the bottom for a minute because we haven't talked about adverbs, but there are 3 ways to spell there. The adverb there is T-H-E-R-E. T-H-E. There are 3 boys in the back. There is my lamp. There is my cat. My cat is over there. Okay, that's an adverb. It tells where. If you were doing the contraction, they are, T-H-E-Y-R-E, and you were writing the contraction, it would be T-H-E-Y apostrophe R-E, and the apostrophe again stands for the A. Then you get to the possessive, and this also sometimes gives people a problem. Okay, they don't know whether to spell there T-H-E-I-R or T-H-I-E-R. So after today's class, you should never make that error, because there, no matter how it's spelled, always begins T-H-E. Now the next item on your error checklist is unfortunately a very common error as well. Do not use apostrophe S as a plural. Now for some reason there must have been some 5th grade teachers out there who confuse some students, and so I do get several people who make plurals by apostrophe S. I have had some friends who I take a look at their shopping list, and their shopping list says that they have to buy some eggs. I just bought eggs today, so if I had it on a shopping list, I wouldn't put the apostrophe S, because that would indicate the eggs own something, or it'd be the eggs carton or something like that. So if you're just talking about eggs, you wouldn't have an apostrophe. Okay, let's talk about another word. Let's talk about doctor. Okay, so if I wrote doctor apostrophe S, then I'd be talking about like a doctor's office. So this would be one doctor's office, possessive. If I was talking about more than one doctor, I would write D-O-C-T-O-R-S, then that would be 2 doctors. However, if I went to 2 doctors' offices, I would put the apostrophe after the S, and then it would be doctors' offices. Okay, unfortunately, there's a little exception, okay? You hate exceptions, but every once in a while you have to have one. Say you are a great student and you get all A's. Now if I wrote A's like that, you wouldn't know. You would think, what are they talking about? So in the case of letters and numerals, so say you were in team 1, ones and A's, numerals and letters, you would in fact then use the apostrophe for plural. Another confusing word for students is the word to. So as you can see on the board, there are 3 different ways to spell the word to. My experience is that nobody has a problem spelling the number 2, T-W-O. However, when you get to the preposition and you get to the adverb, people do have problems. When you use a preposition like to the bank, he gave it to me, I'm going to the store, that's a preposition. It's a little word that starts a phrase that has only one O. If, however, you use the word to as an adverb, meaning he was too loud, she was too funny, the horse trotted too slowly, okay, that would be an adverb. Also, I was going to the party too. I was going to the party also. That would be an adverb, and that has 2 O's. And very often people forget that the adverb, the use of to has 2 O's. Now by the time students get into an English 1A, English composition class, these are 3 little symbols you don't want to see on your paper. They all have to do with sentence structure. ROS means run-on sentence. CS is a comma splice, which is a type of run-on sentence. A fragment is when you have a group of words that's posing as a sentence and it isn't a full sentence. Now these 3 words really need a fuller lesson than we can give in 2 minutes here, but suffice it to say that you shouldn't be seeing these in your essays, and if I see too many, I will have to give you a lesson on how to write complete sentences and not fragments, and how to use commas correctly. Okay, one of the things that you're going to be learning in some of the reading that you do about writing is that the basic tool for a writer is words. And so, unfortunately, people tend to make an error where I'm going to have to write WC or a W question mark. So what does that mean? What's the difference between these two? The word WC, excuse me, the symbol WC means word choice, which means I know exactly what you're saying and you have used the incorrect word. I can give you a little example, and this will probably be imprinted in your mind, but I had a non-English speaking student who was asking me quite a few questions. And after the first 2 weeks of class, she wrote me a little email and she apologized for molesting me. So apparently she had looked in her language translation dictionary and come up with the word molest. So you can all agree that she probably didn't molest me, she just bothered me. Okay, so that was a word choice. That was an incorrect word choice. Now if you get on your paper a symbol that says W question mark, it's probably that I don't understand exactly how you're using the word or what it is that you're talking about. The implication is that if you get WC, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I probably know the word you meant and you used the incorrect one. If you get the W question mark, I'm just not sure what you're talking about. So the next word on your list is the word syntax. So syntax is a handy word for a teacher. What it actually means is word order, and what it translates into is that your word order is all screwed up. And so the best thing for you to do with a sentence that's marked syntax is to read it over, read it aloud, and see what it was that you really meant to say. This unfortunately is an error that a lot of non-native English speakers are going to make because they're not sure of the correct order for an English sentence. And the best way to remedy that is to read a lot of English. Okay, we're going to move on from word order to spelling. Now, the most misspelled word in the English language used to be the word receive, R-E-C-E-I-V-E. Okay, that word is not so misspelled anymore because people have heard the mnemonic. Mnemonic is a memory tool. I before E except after C. So receive is usually spelled correctly, and hopefully you'll spell receive correctly if you remember I before E except after C. Now, some of you will realize that that's not always true, but it is true with the word receive. The word now, that is the most misspelled word, and it's actually on top of the list that I'm going to send you that other article on simple errors that make you look stupid. Lose. Lose is the most misspelled word in the English language. And, it's really interesting, but people tend to spell lose with two O's. Now, these are two separate words. Two O's means loose, like loose change, the screw is loose. But if you lose your keys, it's only one O. Now we're going to be talking about agreement errors. So if you get back a paper and these are your words and two of them are circled and there's the little two letters AG, that means that this word does not agree with this word. This can come up in two instances. One is that your subject doesn't agree with your verb. So your subject might be a plural subject and your verb would be singular, like the couple, the students walks to class. The students walks to class. So that would be a plural subject, and the verb should be singular. So the verb should also be plural, and that would be students walk. It also could be pronoun and antecedent agreement. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure you all understand what an antecedent is. Okay, if I said it came through the door, you wouldn't have any idea what the it was. But if I said that the bird was chirping right in the hallway, and then I said it came through the door, we would know that the it referred to the bird. That was, we talked about in the previous sentence, that was out in the hallway. So the antecedent is the word, it's the word that the pronoun refers to. So antecedent comes from Latin. The first part of it is an ante. Those of you who play poker might know the word to ante up. That's which comes before. Cedent, the second part, is what follows. So an antecedent is actually that which comes before what follows. So it would be the word that comes before the one that followed it. So an antecedent is the word referred to by the pronoun. Okay, the last error I'm going to talk about is a biggie. It's a real big error. You happen to have a teacher who has an editor's eyes, and if you make the error I'm going to talk about now, I'm not going to be able to read whatever it is that you've written because my eyes are going to go right to this error. Now, this is an error that is country specific. So if you're in the United States of America, not if you're in England, not if you're writing English in New Zealand or Australia, but if you're in the United States of America, a period and a comma always go inside the quote marks. Oops. Yeah, so this is a comma, that's a period. They go inside the quote marks. If you write a quote and you put quote marks and you put the period outside, that's absolutely wrong. And you get what I call a tisk-tisk. Actually, all of these errors I call tisk-tisk. You know, your mother telling you naughty, naughty, don't do that. Tisk-tisk. Do not put a period or a comma. Did I say all punctuation? I did not. It only refers to periods and commas. Some punctuation will go outside of quote marks, like a question mark could, a semicolon, a colon, but the only ones I'm concerned with are periods and commas, because those are the most frequent errors that are made. Periods and commas always, in the United States of America, go inside quote marks.